It is 4 a.m. in Santiago, Chile, 8 in London, and 4 on a Thursday afternoon here in Seoul. I'm Moon Gun-young. This is ARIRANG, Korea's only global network. Our top story this afternoon, it has emerged that one of the two unmanned aerial vehicles recently discovered on South Korean soil took nearly 200 photos of the presidential office from above. Now, the drones believed to be from North Korea have Seoul rethinking its air defense strategies. ARIRANG News Kim Hyun-bin starts us off.
South Korea's defense ministry says one of the two unmanned aerial vehicles recently found crashed in the country had taken dozens of pictures of the presidential office of Cheongwade. The UAV, believed to be from North Korea, was found north of Seoul in the city of Paju late last month. The defense ministry says the aircraft flew over the presidential office for 20 seconds, and a Japanese-made Nikon camera attached to it took around 190 pictures. The resolution of the pictures was low, but the plane had a wireless transmitter embedded into it. That has raised speculation that Pyongyang could have received the photos in real time. But the ministry said Thursday that's impossible, considering the rudimentary technology and the low frequency of the equipment. The South National Security Council Standing Committee held an emergency meeting on Wednesday to discuss the recent discoveries and to come up with plans to prevent UAVs from infiltrating the nation's air defense network. Second UAV was found on Monday on the Baekneung-do Island, 1 hour after hundreds of artillery rounds were exchanged between the two Koreas. According to unnamed government sources, the drone found this week was launched from an airport in Hwanghae-namdo, North Korea. South Korea's defense ministry says it had detected the drone on radar and tried to shoot it down, and that it soon thereafter crashed on the island. The two drones recently found are capable of loading up to 1 kilogram of explosives or chemical weapons. Kim Hyun-bin, ARIRANG News.
At a time of strained relations between Korea and Japan over historical and territorial issues, U.S. President Barack Obama is going to be swinging by both countries later this month. And as our Choi-Yusun reports, the most likely date for Obama to make a stop here in Seoul at this point seems to be April 25th.
U.S. President Barack Obama is expected to visit Korea for 2 days from April 25th to the 26th. During his fourth visit to Seoul as U.S. president, Obama will reaffirm the Seoul-Washington alliance and assess the implementation of the 2-year-old Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement with President Park Geun-hye. Amid Pyongyang's recent firing of missiles and its threat of a new form of nuclear test, North Korea-related security issues will likely dominate talks between the two leaders. Ahead of President Obama's trip, top nuclear envoys from South Korea, the U.S., and Japan will meet in Washington next week. The meeting is a follow-up to President Park's summit with her U.S. and Japanese counterparts on the sidelines of last week's nuclear security summit in The Hague. Before coming to Korea, President Obama will make a state visit to Japan starting on the 23rd. Sources in Washington say the U.S. has added a day to the president's Tokyo itinerary after Japan said 2 days wouldn't be enough to make Obama's state visit more meaningful. The last U.S. president to make a state visit to Japan was Bill Clinton in 1996. The Washington-Tokyo alliance and their negotiations for a 12-member Trans-Pacific Partnership free trade deal are likely to come up during President Obama's talks with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. But there's a greater attention towards how Obama will address relations between Washington's two main Asian allies, strained from Japan's denials of its imperialistic aggressions. The U.S. president will also visit the Philippines and Malaysia. Choi-Yusun, ARIRANG News.
And this just coming in, as South Korea has named a new envoy to the six-party denuclearization talks, Hwang Jun-guk. Now, Hwang is currently the South Korean ambassador for defense burden sharing, which is Seoul's top delegate for the Special Measures Agreement negotiations with the United States. Hwang is a career diplomat who has also served as a deputy chief of mission and minister for political affairs at the Korean embassy in Washington, D.C. He replaces Cho Tae-yong as Korea's chief nuclear envoy. Now, the governor of the U.S. state of Virginia has put his signature on a landmark bill that will change the way students in that state learn about the body of water that separates the Korean peninsula and Japan. It also represents the culmination of a long campaign launched by a Korean-American group, which now hopes it'll spread to other states. Connie Kim has the details.
From here on out, when students in the U.S. state of Virginia learn about the body of water that separates Korea and Japan, they'll learn to call it by two names, the EC and Sea of Japan. The Voice of Korean Americans says Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe has signed into law a landmark bill on the EC name. McAuliffe's approval was long anticipated as he was believed to be against the bill, at least initially. The law that takes effect on July 1st requires all textbooks in the state Virginia to identify the body of water by its Korean name, the EC, and its Japanese name, the Sea of Japan. The Japanese government had put in massive lobbying efforts to block the EC bill from getting approval. The campaign started with the Voice of Korean Americans. It says the name Sea of Japan is a cruel reminder of Japan's imperialist past, as the name was registered when the Korean peninsula was under Japanese colonial rule. Virginia is the first U.S. state to pass such a bill, and it'll likely have implications on other states in the U.S. 7 states currently use the same textbook as Virginia. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
Now, Korea's candidate nomination system for local elections was under the microscope on the first day of a 4-day cross-questioning session of lawmakers at Seoul's National Assembly. Lawmakers from the two main rival parties debated over whether to scrap a system in which political parties nominate candidates for local elections. Abolishing the system was a key campaign pledge of both the ruling and opposition candidates in the run-up to the 2012 presidential election, as it can act as a breeding ground for bribery scandals. The National Intelligence Service also came under fire at the session, and it stands accused of forging evidence against a former Seoul City official who was suspected of spying for North Korea.
When the latest news meets the latest business stories, we give you a bigger and better picture of the world. Business Today with Moon Gon-young. Every weekday, only on ARIRANG.
Open an era of trust and peace on the Korean peninsula. Speaking at the annual national. And on to the latest developments in the Chilean earthquake. One day after being hit with a strong magnitude 8.2 earthquake, the South American nation has been rocked again by a strong aftershock. Our Shin Se-min joins us on the phone to give us the latest. Se-min, there have been dozens of aftershocks over the past 24 hours, but this one was much stronger. And of course, we join you from the news center.
Much stronger, Konyang. This was a powerful magnitude 7.8 aftershock. It struck off northern Chile late Wednesday local time, just one day after 8.2 magnitude quake in the same area generated a tsunami. Wednesday's aftershock was centered about 40 kilometers southwest of the mining port city Iquique, 10 kilometers beneath the ocean floor. A tsunami warning was initially issued for Chile and Peru, but has since been lifted. This was the strongest of some 140 aftershocks that followed yesterday's huge quake and that killed 6 and damaged tens of thousands of homes. And although it was powerful at a 7.8, there hasn't been any significant damage reported. The Chilean President Michelle Bachelet, who also was visiting the hardest hit area Wednesday, was also evacuated from her hotel in the city of Arica.
Now, Se-min, I can just imagine how the Chilean people are just coping with these 2 earthquakes and in a row as well. Now, and why is this area especially so prone to earthquakes, both big and small?
Yes, considering the strength of these 2 quakes and all the other aftershocks to hit the nation, they've been coping remarkably well. I mean, the experts are giving credit to the Chilean government and its people for being able to prepare for such incidents. And the nation has strict building codes with earthquakes in mind and evacuated people from danger zones quickly. And as for the total damage, it's still too early to determine how high it might go, but early estimates are at around $30 billion US. And as for why this area is especially prone, Chile is in the Pacific's Ring of Fire, an area where earthquakes and volcanic eruptions often occur. Kanyang?
All right, that was our Shin Se-min reporting on the strong 7.8 magnitude aftershock in Chile. Much thanks to you. Now moving over to the U.S., another shooting rampage there. A soldier who was being evaluated for post-traumatic stress disorder opened fire at U.S. Army's Fort Hood base, Texas, on Wednesday, killing 3 and wounding 16 others before killing himself. The shooting set off a huge police response and shut down the sprawling Army base. Now, this is the same facility where a deadly rampage by an officer resulted in 13 deaths back in 2009. Well, no motive has yet been identified, but the soldier, identified as Ivan Lopez, was being treated for mental health issues. U.S. President Barack Obama promised to get to the bottom of what happened.
We're heartbroken that something like this might have happened again. And I don't want to comment on the facts until I know exactly what has happened. But for now, I would just hope that everybody across the country is keeping the families and the community of Fort Hood in our thoughts and in our prayers.
Officials say Lopez had served in Iraq in 2011 and was suffering from depression. Korea's finance minister has one eye firmly fixed on the economic slowdown in China. He is pointing to the spread of credit risks in China's financial market and is telling policymakers to make sure that any aftershocks do not damage the Korean economy. ARIRANG News Hwang Ji-hye has the details.
During a meeting with fellow policymakers on Thursday, Korean Finance Minister Hyun Oh-seok expressed concerns of possible risks stemming from the slowing Chinese economy. Hyun said the government will closely monitor China's economic conditions to minimize possible effects from the slowdown, which could bleed into global financial markets. The nation's top economic policymaker also emphasized that Korea's main export items to China should shift from parts to consumer goods, citing the Chinese government's drive to boost domestic demand. In a separate issue discussed at the meeting, the Korean government laid out plans to become the world's 5th power nation in terms of overseas construction by 2017. Korea currently ranks 6th in the field, and construction contracts secured by Korean companies are expected to top $70 billion this year. Turning the nation's overseas construction into a higher value-added business is one of the key tasks in the government's 3-year economic innovation plan. To foster the construction sector, Hyun pledged financial support for small and medium-sized companies and promised to build a foundation for research and development catered toward overseas construction businesses. Hwang Ji-hye, ARIRANG News.
Now, shopping on Korean online malls for those Koreans living overseas and foreigners living overseas wasn't so easy, but that's just about to change. Financial authorities say they will revise a bill that requires customers to go through an online verification process when purchasing items worth more than 300,000 won, that's roughly $280 through online shopping malls. The new measure, expected to be implemented before June this year, will no longer require e-commerce companies from running the software, although they can choose to continue doing so if they want. The financial watchdogs say the measure is aimed at diversifying certification procedures and allowing companies to come up with their own security measures. And now on to some alarming news about Korea's snowballing debt problem. The demand for loans among households and companies is expected to rise sharply in the second quarter of this year. The Bank of Korea said Thursday that the index that gauges the expected demand for loans at local banks for the April to June period stood at 27. Now, the closer the number gets to the 100 mark, the higher the demand for loans. And the 27 figure is the highest since the first quarter of 2002 and a spike from the 8 recorded in the January to March period last year. Korea's expenditure on R&D compared to its GDP ranked the highest among 25 key trading nations around the world. A report released by financial services company HSBC shows that as of 2011, Korea spent 3.7% of its GDP on research and development. Now, that's higher than the U.S. and China, which spent 2.8% and 1.8% respectively. The report puts Korea at the top of the value chain and says the nation plays a significant role in the production of high-value added components thanks to its investment in R&D. Well, HSBC Korea CEO Martin Tricot says Korea's focus on research and development has made it an active and innovative production hub, which in turn has given it a competitive edge in the global market. Meanwhile, the head of the International Monetary Fund has applied some fresh pressure to both developed and emerging economies. Now, she is calling for more aggressive policy steps to accelerate a still modest global economic recovery. Son Jung-in reports.
IMF Managing Director Christine Lagarde said the global economy is putting some distance between it and the Great Recession, but also says the overall growth remains too slow and too weak and faces multiple threats. In a speech at Johns Hopkins University on Wednesday, Lagarde cited three main obstacles to faster growth that the world economy is facing. The first is low inflation, particularly in the Eurozone and Japan, which could suppress demand, output, and jobs. The second was heightened market volatility in emerging markets, which, if not addressed properly, could worsen as advanced economies begin monetary tightening. The third obstacle, she said, was the rise of geopolitical tensions, especially surrounding Ukraine and Russia, which could put the global economic recovery at risk if not managed well. Lagarde said the IMF projects global growth this year to surpass last year's 3% rate, forecasting the U.S. expansion to be one of the strongest among advanced economies. She added emerging Asian economies are projected to grow 6.5% and China at a 7.5% rate. However, she warned that unless countries come together and formulate the right kind of policy measures, the world economy could be facing more years of slow growth. Son Jung-in, ARIRANG News.
The Bank of Korea has a new chief. Lee Ju-yeol, a career central banker, took the helm this month, and many in the financial realm are keeping a close eye on how the central bank's key policies will shape up under him. Let's bring in Dr. Kim Byung-ju for a very interesting discussion on the new BOK chief and the chemistry between him and the nation's finance minister. Good afternoon to you, Dr. Kim.
Good afternoon.
So yesterday, one of the top economic news making headlines here in Korea was actually Finance Minister and Deputy Prime Minister Hyun Woo-seok's visit to this new governor of Bank of Korea, Lee Ju-yeol. Was this just a simple goodwill gesture by the chief economic policymaker, or is there something more? I mean, why is this so significant?
Well, it looks like there were a lot of things that Deputy Prime Minister Hyun Woo-seok had in his mind, perhaps. Otherwise, he would not have brought this kind of nice portrait drawing of the governor himself. And actually, Deputy Prime Minister came back to Korea early yesterday morning, 7:30 in the morning, coming back from Brazil. And his visit to governor's office itself was the first scheduled event for him. So it was a very special one in a way. You know, anyone could be very tired after long trip from Brazil. And so, you know, he went there and wanted to say all these nice words. And he actually said, well, you know, we should meet again and again. And I don't know what exact response from the governor himself was to that comment itself.
Well, I'm sure a positive one. You cannot say a negative one to that.
However, the news media noted the fact that actually the governor did not meet the deputy prime minister at the lobby or entrance of the building or even at the elevator. Rather, he was waiting for him in his office. So a lot of speculations about what actually that meant, that gesture meant. And also reaction or after the meeting itself, the statements that came out of the one finance minister on one side and then the central bank on the other were quite different. The finance ministry took pain to explain this is a starting point of a good cooperation between two institutions. But however, the Bank of Korea made a point that this was not a first time ever meeting between the governor and the finance minister. It took place 5 years before, so this is the second time.
A very rare one.
Yeah, trying to play down in the eyes of many observers, playing down the overall importance of the meeting. So it was very interesting to just observe these different differences in reaction.
I think just the fact that they were pointing that one out, makes it all the more significant.
Right.
Looking back to March 19th, we saw the first ever hearing for the appointment hearing for BOK governor at the National Assembly. I mean,
Right.
we hadn't seen one in the Bank of Korea's history, I believe.
Right.
Now, it went surprisingly smoothly. Now, could we view this as a win for the Park administration?
I think many observers seem to believe that is indeed the case this time. But however, the decision did not come out in any easy way. There was lots of efforts that were made in terms of like considering different names. And there are so many different names being aired as we covered before in this program as well. And finally, at the end, this insider was chosen out of so many different names. And a lot of people are saying this was rather a safe choice made by the Park administration itself, because there were different names of the close associates of President Park Geun-hye herself or other kind of like real outsiders with very controversial viewpoints and so on. And this was a very in the middle or centrist choice in a way. And we know Governor Lee is a very much known for his balanced view. He's not classified as a dove or hawk. Rather, he has been very centrist in a way, trying to follow overall the direction of his bosses before, and very measured person in a way, and very much insider, as I mentioned before. He spent 35 years in the central bank.
Wow.
So real expert in terms of monetary policy in a way. So indeed, even the opposition party, they didn't say anything of any harshy words at the time of the hearing at all. And so it was a very safe choice and then smooth sailing, as you mentioned. And it looks like observers were saying, as a result of this very careful choice, actually Park administration scored a big win here.
Now, at last month's hearing, and of course also yesterday on Tuesday's inauguration,
Right.
the new governor mentioned market trust in monetary policy. Now, what does he mean by that? I mean, if he means predictability, then that's not necessarily always good in terms of monetary policy.
You are right. Actually, in his inauguration speech, he said, the key point about monetary policy is effective management of the market expectation itself. And so what he meant was probably not going against overall market expectation as what market is expecting. But however, as you mentioned, sometimes a surprise move is necessary. So he was just saying that I think he was making a point that his predecessor, Kim Jong-soo, for instance, under his leadership, central bank was making a choice that no one had really expected, or choice that was different from what was expecting from the previous indications from the central bank. So I think he was just making his statement that he's not going to make such a mistake. And he seems to be, the new governor seems to be emphasizing a lot about the communication. And that part, we're not certain about what the communication really means. So we'll need more time in making any judgment on his effectiveness as the central bank governor. So a lot is riding on this at this time.
Now, the general expectation seems to be that the new BOK governor will not be too bullish about BOK reforms. Now, is he risking a public backlash for that?
I think there is such possibility. I mean, predecessor Kim Jong-soo was very enthusiastic and eager to change the internal structure of the Bank of Korea. Bank of Korea, by the way, is well known for its conservatism and a lot of people's kind of like, in a way, moral hazard among the staff themselves that's often observed in Korea's big corporations. So Kim Jong-soo was very head-on and bullish about reform, and now this new governor going against the overall tradition that was set up by his predecessor, short-lived tradition. A lot of people are concerned whether he will actually actually advocate the interest of the insiders, which is not necessarily the national interest. So a lot of eyes are watching at this point, and a new governor is saying he's just going to review everything that has been introduced by his predecessor and bring in necessary change. And what that means, well, further stability and status quo for the insiders, in that case, I'm sure he will risk, as you mentioned, the big backlash after the end of his legacy. But I'm sure he's a smart enough person to avoid that. So probably he will go with certain balance. He's saying he's going to keep an eye on his long-term performance of the staffs when he considers promotion and all that. That means a very tough task in terms of devising very intricate evaluation system of the performances of the staff.
Well, definitely, from what we've seen so far of him, he seems like a very prudent, a man with prudence. So we'll have to wait and see how the Bank of Korea will run, its monetary policies will run under this new chief. And very interestingly, the harmony between the Bank of Korea and the Finance Ministry.
Let's wait and see.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Kim Byung-ju. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
And that is all from me at this hour. Thank you for watching, and do join me again at 6 p.m. Korea time on Early Edition at 6.